My name's Richard Betts. I'm the group publisher at Real Asset Media. We run a series of these events, 50 or 60 a year, looking at key topics, key geographies, key themes in the industry. We also publish newsletters, events, magazines, the Real Asset Insight, and also particularly for this, living retail. But our aim is really to share insights, research, strategy, and kind of bring together people and connect. During the crisis, we've obviously produced a lot of new initiatives just to help keep everybody connected. Realcast, also all of these events have moved online. And we're also producing RealX.global in September, on September the 18th and 17th and 18th. Also just to create a virtual exhibition and conference as a kind of launch back into the markets after the summer break. And we'll also do a similar one in January as well after the winter break. But it's a super panel here. So we've got Thorsten of PwC, Chris Igwe of Igwe International, Christina Conrads of PwC Legal, Matthias Klein of Orsay, Rowan Verwoerd of Redevco, and last but not least, Herman of Meyer, Bergman. Let's just start with a quick introduction. Maybe if we can just start, perhaps with you, Chris, and just give everybody a sort of insight on who you are and what you do, Chris.
My name is Chris Igwe. I am based in Paris. Been here for about 25 years. I started my career initially as a civil engineer, but then moved into retail. Joined Foot Locker as head of real estate, lived in the Netherlands for 3 years, and then joined Gap to do head of real estate equally there. I then transitioned into different parts of the industry, heading up ICSC as the European MD, and then moved into the brokerage industry, if you like, CBRE, looking after France, and also EMEA specifically. Now, what I do on a daily basis, as it were, is advising retailers and brands in their immediate issues, from strategy right the way through to execution of that plan. And of course, in today's world, addressing some of their challenges as far as the portfolio is concerned. And that's, I guess, as much as I can say just now. I can fill in the rest, Richard, later on.
Great, super. Thanks very much, Chris. Herman.
Yeah, Herman Cook, based in London, working with Meyer Bergman now for almost 3 years as head of research. Time goes fast. Before joining Meyer Bergman, I was basically working for almost 16 years as head of research, market researcher, different levels at Multi-Development Corporation in the Netherlands, but mainly for its international operations, read Spain, Portugal, Central Europe, Germany, but also a lot of work done in Turkey. And basically started working as a consultant, Opron Consultants, a Dutch-based consultancy company with operations also in Central Europe, Hungary, where I lived and worked for about 5 years, with also a short intermediate stop at ICSC as research analyst, working together with Chris Igwe. And my real start was doing a PhD in the university in Utrecht in the Netherlands on Central Europe.
Great, super. Matthias.
Hi all together. I'm Matthias Klein. I'm based in the south of Germany, close to the border of France. I'm living in Strasbourg and Düsseldorf. I'm the CEO of Orsay since 10 years. The company, we have 700 stores doing $500 million of turnover a year, and we have 100 million of e-com, roughly 20% e-com sales already, 5.5 million club members, 10 million customer data, etc. I was CEO for the Betty Barclay Group. I was in my life the first retail manager for Esprit in the early 80s. I was born in the business, and I did also 2 startups as well that I worked 5 years in the investment business. I'm also a private equity advisor, by the way. But my heart is retail. I love retail. I was born in that family business by my parents, and so I'm a passion retailer, knowing, of course, what we have to succeed now after the COVID crisis. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rowan.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rowan Verwoerd, Portfolio Director at Redevco Germany since 2017. Redevco is managing over 300 assets in the major cities in Europe. a portfolio of approximately 7.5 billion euro. We acquire, manage, and develop urban real estate for a client. In Germany, I'm responsible for the asset and project management of our German portfolio with a local team of asset and project managers. We manage and develop for our clients 50 cities of Germany. And before my current position, I've worked 5 years for a retailer in China. Before that, 7 years in the Netherlands for Redevco. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Rowan. Christiane.
Hello, everybody. My name is Christina Conrad. I'm a German qualified real estate lawyer. I'm focusing on real estate transactions and legal asset management work, and also on environmental, social, government contracts. And I'm with PwC for 2.5 years now. Before that, I was with DLA Piper for 8 years. And also joined a boutique law firm, local and partner, for almost 2 years. At PwC, I had a German real estate legal desk at PwC in London, and also a team in Cologne. And I'm a member of the German Legal Practice Group. And in the last couple of weeks, we have been heavily involved in renegotiations of pan-European retail lease portfolios, where we advise both landlords and tenants from a strategic and also from a legal point of view. And therefore, I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Christiane. Thorsten.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thorsten. I'm a senior manager with PwC Germany. I'm working hand in hand with Christiane on the strategic projects she mentioned earlier. Normally I work in the deals practice in Germany from the Düsseldorf office, and I'm focusing on all deals related buy-side, sell-side advice, or contract negotiations. And I started recently picking up the topics on ESG, due diligence, and ESG as such, because I believe this is the future of retail assets or real estate assets as such. And so I think it's a pretty interesting topic to deal with. Thank you.
Great, and the session today is going to start with a presentation from Thorsten and Christiane, and feel free to load those slides up, and then we'll share those. Thorsten.
What we want to talk briefly about is the market as we see it from our discussions with our clients, with tenants, with landlords over the last weeks and months. I think everyone can agree COVID-19 was a crisis no one has foreseen, and the impacts will be long-lasting. We just go to our market overview slide over here. What we basically see, we're right now in the middle on the left-hand side. We see, okay, we're in the reopening phase. We have a lockdown, depending on which country you're from, between 6 and 10 weeks. Stores were closed, the consumer were totally shell-shocked, and the life as such just stopped for several weeks or months. And right now, are we back to normal? Well, it seems like that from our perspective. We are picking up, but what we also see from different surveys we conduct with consumers is that the way consumers see shopping, the shopping experience just changed dramatically. They are asking more for e-commerce, like they shop online and expect their brands to deliver it at home, or they got only the chance to pick it up in the store. So they say online, I want to buy this or that good, and I just come in the shop, pick it up, and leave directly. And what we see over the last 1 to 2 weeks, at least in Germany, is that the reduced traffic just started to go up a bit, but we're not there where we've been pre-COVID-19. On the other hand, we see that over the last weeks or months, several retailers do not just make it. The weeks and months of lockdown were just too much for them. We saw, for instance, Debenham went insolvency in UK, Karstadt Kaufhof and Esprit are brands in Germany, which likely will not survive this crisis. And we think that if you want to be successful as a brand, as a retailer, you just have to understand that the way you did shopping, the consumers did shopping they used to be, will not be the same in the future. We think we will see a mix home shopping and shopping at home via laptop, and some kind of store picking up. But we will not return soon to the way it used to be. And we can see, for instance, in the UK, we can see that will highly impact the market rent. We see decrease of 25 to 50% in new market contracts. And the way we see it right now is that tenants and landlords are in this mess, so to speak, together, and so they have to join forces and find solutions that they can survive, because they are so interdependent. And that is why we think there needs to start discussions. And I think with this really brief overview, I just want to hand over to my colleague Christiane, who will go into more details what we see in the market at the moment going on and how potential solutions can look like.
Thank you very much, Thorsten. I hope you can all hear me. When you look at this economic development on the one hand and compare it with provisions in European retail lease agreements on the other hand, one can notice that most lease agreements need to be amended to better cope with these rapid economic changes, which is pretty clear for the current pandemic. But also going forward, there will be a change at least we expect a significant change of the retail market. And as I said before, when you look at the lease agreements, there is a need to amend the agreements to better prepare both parties of the lease agreement to deal with these changes in a collaborative way. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we are quite active right now in our pan-European leasing projects. And in these projects, we have basically identified two main aspects which should be considered when renegotiating retail lease agreements, in order to put both parties in a better position. And as I said before, not only to deal with the current pandemic, but also with the ongoing changes in the retail sector in a fair and collaborative way. Firstly, in almost all jurisdictions, neither standard clauses in lease agreements nor statutory provisions or case law give really a clear answer as to whether the rent was reduced during lockdown and the reopening period. So this will basically need to be decided by the courts in the next couple of years. And we don't expect a clear guidance from the higher court in Germany, for example, in this regard before next year at the very earliest. And due to this uncertainty, there's actually a great need for both parties to the lease agreement to implement special pandemic or force majeure clauses to not only deal with the restrictions which we've seen over the last couple of weeks and months, but also with potential future second and third waves of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the second aspect we've identified in the project is that it is in the best interest of both parties to implement more flexibility into the lease agreement. For example, from a landlord's point of view, it might be beneficial to agree on more provisions which give him more flexibility when it comes to relocations of rented premises and to reconstruct the shopping malls. And from a tenant's point of view, we basically see the need to have more flexibility in the lease agreement when it comes to the term of the lease, but also the type of the use, operating obligations, and obligations to sell specific product ranges. For example, in Germany, the Federal Court of Justice even ruled in February, so before the restrictions of the current pandemic, that a combination of clauses requiring the tenant to open every day for several hours and to sell only a specific range of products, while excluding any protection against competition, unduly limits the tenant's ability to operate its business in the rented premises. So, and as a consequence, the court found that the provision excluding protection against competition shall be invalid. And also this decision kind of confirms the need to check all retail lease agreements right now, if these agreements give also the tenant enough freedom to successfully operate its business and to adapt to economic changes. In our perception, several professional landlords are willing to take this into consideration. Of course, we also see the first court proceedings where landlords are trying to enforce all potential claims for full rental payments during the lockdown period and refuse to start negotiations. But this approach might be more taken by smaller private landlords who only own one or just a few buildings. The vast majority of landlords appear to be willing to start negotiations, and some of them have already started negotiations with collaborative tenants in order to find a way to manage the current crisis together, as Thorsten said. So this is really unique right now and is a good basis for contract negotiations. I think anybody understands that the current situation is not caused by either one of the parties, and you can only get through it together. We would like to share what we have learned in the last couple of weeks in our project, and as we think these recommendations will not only benefit one party but will benefit both landlords and tenants in the long terms. What you can see here is basically 6 recommendations. Starting with the flexibility. So as I said before, it's beneficial not to have rigid, strict provisions in the lease agreements, but really take into consideration what flexibility you need in the future to successfully run the business in the premises. For example, restrictions of type of use might be extended to allow different types of the extension of e-commerce business in the rental premises, which was could have been particularly helpful during the complete lockdown, the closure for the public. And then I think you see it there in black. The first main point is really important, and what I understand that both landlords and tenants are willing to share upsides and downsides by turnover rent. And when this is being discussed, it's quite important that it goes both ways and not one party is put to a disadvantage. And another aspect in this regard is such provision in the lease agreement should allow for monthly or quarterly payment adjustments versus the annual adjustments which we see right now, which we have been seeing for the last 2 decades in the lease agreements. Then I mentioned it before, we don't hope so, but a second or third wave are likely, so it's important to implement some pandemic or force majeure clauses in the lease agreements to be prepared for that and find a solution and not starting the negotiations all over again if another lockdown happens. Then what is also particularly in Germany a big topic and is also being brought into the negotiations with the landlords, but this is I understand that several other European countries have the same situation where you might have invalid clauses in the lease agreements, for example on service charges or repair works, or in Germany also the written form requirement. And so when these negotiations happening right now, landlords and tenants also look at the overall agreement and see if there is anything which should be healed in the amendment, and providing for more legal certainty in this regard. Then what we also see, due to the several restrictions by the authority, the ongoing pandemic, we have much more health and safety requirements all over Europe. We have an increased operator responsibility, which is quite a big liability risk and should be carefully reviewed by both parties. And it's in the best interest of both parties to sit down and discuss and really also document which party of the lease agreement has to comply with which obligation. And last but not least, and Thorsten has mentioned it before, we strongly recommending ESG compliant clauses, or the green leases clauses, into the lease agreement. This is to increase user satisfaction, reduce service charges and life cycle costs, and but also be compliant with future regulation. In particular, the EU Sustainable Finance taxonomy, which is right now on the top of the agenda of most institutional landlords.
Thanks, Thorsten. Thanks, Christiane. It's a treat for me to have somebody who's a retailer on one of my panels, Matthias, because often I'm really focused on the investment and the real estate part of it. So maybe just starting with you, if we can, I'd be interested just to get a sense. Obviously the crisis came almost out of nowhere. What has it meant in terms of your business and strategy? I suppose what have the influences been on your business?
We are a retailer with 700 stores in 12 countries in Central Europe. And of course, the situation pre-COVID was the same for all our retail business. We see since 10 years, more or less, we have every year. In the last 4 years, we had 4-5% traffic loss. So if you count 4 years backwards, you talk about 20% traffic loss comparing to 4 years ago. And we knew already pre-COVID that the next 4 years will be the next 4-5% a year. So then you come to the next 20%. So in 8 years, we have 40% less traffic. What we already did, as the most retailers, check your store portfolio. So we started 3 years ago that we only make these contracts for 3 years. So what is behind it? We renegotiate with our landlords. We define the assumptions and complete new. And beside that, we succeed with Orsay. This is maybe another story with 20% already on e-commerce. So then the web to store to web is helping us, but not compensating easily all what we lose on retail traffic. So this was pre-COVID, so we know the scenario, and we also restructure we restructure our store portfolio. We were negotiating with tenants. We know what to close stores, where we know where we want to open stores. And this is now after COVID, immediately what we forecasted for the next 3-4 years is now happening in 6 months. So now you come to the landlord, say, okay, the 40% what we see here is coming now immediately. So you will see that also next year and the year after, we will have much difficulty. And then you can split of stores outside of the city. You can go for high streets, and the most effective is a city center. Yes, and then we started, of course, like the most, we stopped payment, how we can do this, is it allowed or not? We called the landlords, and we have 10% private landlords. We really support them also if there's a family living on, so really fair. On the other side, if you have investment partners, and they're living in Los Angeles or whatever, and they have the management here, you know all the stories behind. Then we structure this, and only to mention, this is why Christiane pleased me to be here. We started then immediately to structure what is now the way to be good, the best way prepared. Because if we not pay rents or whatever, we have a good expansion team on our side, we have legal on our side, but is it enough? And if you're talking about the legal security, and we're talking about 12 countries, we said, okay, let's start immediately with a professional setup. We use the PwC support with Christiane on that side. And we structured now a really clear plan. And it's beside a legal opinion, because you have to make very clear each store is now different. So we have centers where you lose competitors. A lot competitors are insolvency. So there's a dramatic change, and if the center is not anymore driven by the food court, because the food court business is restricted by all this. And you see in Serbia we have again since 3 days a full lockdown, no? And in Serbia we have also 15 stores. So this is all happened now, and everything have to bring on the table. And now we start after the 3-4 months to go in deep negotiation with the big landlords, to find the fair and the right way. And not only for the year of 2020, it's for the future. And we have a clear view what we want to achieve. And if it's needed to go for court, what we all want to avoid, then I'm sure we are good prepared also with the setup we have on our side.
Okay, good. And Chris, is this something that you see? I mean, you've obviously been involved with a number of landlords and tenants, I suppose, on both sides of that. Is this a big change that is, in some ways, I suppose, overdue in the industry? Is this a catalyst for some of the changes, do you think? Or is this something specific just to get over this problem in terms of the health crisis?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a problem for a while, Richard, because I think we know that the reality is, like anything, we've not necessarily implemented because there's been no sense of urgency really in the sector. But I remember about 3 years ago, I'd already been putting it out there that retailers should start thinking about reducing their portfolio by at least 25% for many of them. And in some cases, I was challenged on it, but I still stand by it even more so today. I said some would have to go to 40% reduction in their portfolio across single or multiple markets. Why? Because they had grown to a point where the relevance of the brand or the concept was being lost on the consumer, especially when, as you know, we look at that sector of young fast fashion, which has been the one that has really had an excess of inventory anyway, and is not really focused on the requirements of a changing consumer who has gone in a different direction, many of them female, of course, shopping online. So the reduction in portfolio was a necessity. Now it's an absolute requirement for survival. So I guess that's the good news in some senses from the retailer's point of view. From the landlord's point of view, of course, it's not, because it creates vacancies which they would have to deal with at some stage in the future. But I think this is, you know, I don't want to sound negative, but I think we have to look at things, you know, well, I'm not negative anyway, but realistically and say, this is the best moment in the retail real estate industry change the habits of the past. If we don't change it, we will, in many places, literally die. So I don't want to put too much of an emphasis on it, but because we advise retailers on a daily basis, there are some who don't have cash. So it's as simple as that. They've run out of cash. If you don't have cash, you can't survive. The next is the consumer doesn't want to come back to the mall, shopping center, to the brand or tenant anyway. How do you adjust all that? So I think it's a real time for internal reflection and strategies being revised in a very clear way by various retailers.
Okay, good. Rowan, picking up those points, obviously Redevco as a shopping centre owner and manager, I suppose, how do you see the challenges at the moment? And I know there's been a gradual, I suppose, shift in emphasis would be the best way to put it for Redevco, and move to a more kind of diverse portfolio in a way. But how do you see the current challenges, and has that accelerated some of the strategy, would you say?
I think it has accelerated. So the disruption that has taken place for a few years ago already with online retailing, that it is said that the focus is more and more on the top cities, inner cities, where retailers come together. Chris mentioned, I believe, a few years ago, the space race is over, and that is also, I think, that was also true then, but it was not impacted so fast with the fashion retailers. And we see now that COVID really accelerated this. Here in Germany, you see that Esprit closed 50 of their 100 stores. Karstadt is closing 56 of their department stores, and that are really huge locations, assets with sometimes 10 to 20,000 square meters taken away from shopping malls or inner cities. And that's also for us as a Redevco that we see that sometimes also as a chance. So often these are things from the past, department stores over 6-7 floors, and you see the customer doesn't want to shop over 6 or 7 floors anymore. That was maybe in the past, but nowadays not any longer. You see more the trend towards the 1, maybe 2 floors for fashion retailers, sometimes 3, but that's the max. So I think these top floors is what we do now, that we try to revamp that into hotel, residential, bring in also gastro, F&B on the ground floor, supermarkets in the basement, that you still focus on fashion, but maybe only on ground and first floor.
I mean, Matthias there mentioned about urbanization and moving into kind of city center stores particularly. So I'm just going to launch a poll here, which is about urbanization. What about urbanization in the light of COVID-19? Because there's been a lot of discussion around, will people move out to the suburbs? Will they move to the beach? Will they move wherever? Or will urbanization continue at the same rate as it has done previously? So please do vote on that, and I'll come back to you. I'll come back to that shortly. Herman, I just wanted to pick up, and you're not allowed to say anything about urbanization to affect the poll yet, Herman. But obviously, from your point of view, Meyer Bergman has focused on mixed use a lot of the time, and mixed use was already something that was prevalent in the industry, particularly on the retail side. Do you see this as accelerating that trend, or I suppose, how do you see that?
Obviously, what we see happening now in the retail market per se, it has already been mentioned by Rowan, acceleration of ongoing trends from the past. Chris also already mentioned, store reduction from by retailers 25 up to 40%. That kind of trend definitely, and I agree with, that's going to continue. We see also a few new trends obviously upcoming. We always thought until quite recently that typically the prime retail areas were, let's say, not too much affected by the ongoing transformation. But I think in most of the countries, we're shift in that respect. Looking to urban mixed use, I think that's something to continue. Obviously, first of all, looking, let's say, to the trend which is already going on for quite a while. I'm not allowed to talk about urbanization, which makes my point difficult. But
hang on. What I'll do is, just to make that easier for you.
No worries. I can handle.
I'll share the results now. Urbanization will see a pause. Was 45%. Urbanization will continue at the same rate, is 39%. And urbanization will decrease, i.e. people will move out of cities, is last at 16%. So now you're free to pick up on that again.
The trend of mixing functions, creating, let's say, areas where people can work, can live, can meet people, can shop, whatever. I think that trend is to continue. Patterns may change. I can imagine that, for instance, sub-centers, district centers, shorter distance, all that kind of patterns are becoming more important. As you know, people may have increasing difficulties to make long commutes in public transport. Obviously, congestion, those are all issues which are growing. E-bikes, whatever way of transport may become more important in the future. And that, of course, can affect location patterns. But I think more importantly, what we are going to see with that massive restructuring in the market, retail is now starting or continuing. And I think we will also see restructuring in other sides of the business as well. How are companies going to be affected? Do they have to reduce their office space? Other things to happen. I think, buildings, urban systems, they tend to be relatively static. Buildings are built for multiple generations, longer term. Functions will change. That dynamic will definitely increase in the coming years. So obviously, creating, let's say, new functions, new positionings, whatever is going to be essential for landlords. And of course, that's also, particularly for landlords who are used to work in urban mixed use, is the main added value they can offer is to give a new future to whatever building becomes available. Basically unlock the potential value. And given all the dynamics we see in the market now in terms of businesses, in terms of retail, in terms of gastronomy, that task is even becoming more urgent.
Okay, that's interesting. That picks up one of the questions in a way from Rob Verdi. What is considered as a good tenants mix in the post-COVID-19 world? I.e., what percentage should be fashion, F&B, and I'd also add leisure into that as well. Just in terms of that mix, do you think that's shifted? Is there now a more of a mix in terms of leisure, retail, those things? Anybody can pick that up.
Let me, if I may, Richard, at least kick that one off. I think, firstly, there is no, and even pre-COVID, there was no absolute answer to that question of the mix. I mean, we knew that F&B was growing as a percentage overall, depending on which market you were in. It was going from about 10, 15% up to maybe 20, 25% GLA, whereas having traveled myself a bit to China, it makes no difference. You know, some malls are 50% F&B. So there's no immediate conclusion as to what it would be. But what I think is definitely the challenge today is that although there's we kind of heard this, probably most of us initially, that there was a move towards less fashion or less traditional retail, let's say, and more towards leisure. The danger there is, on the one hand, social distancing and sanitation requirements doesn't make it any easier for leisure, including F&B, to be a part of a shopping centre mix today or going forward. And the second is, which you may touch on later on, Richard, is the rent profile, because we know that leisure generally pays less rent. They've got tighter margins. So how can and maybe Rowan has a view on this in terms of from an investor's point of view, it's very difficult to make the numbers stack up where the bias is away from traditional retail. And I'll finish with one example. I might have the figures slightly wrong, but American Dream, the big mall just outside New York, decided pre-COVID, in fact, to go from, it's still being built, as you may know, in phases. It's a huge project, to go away from more traditional retail, and in fact flipped it towards 70% non-retail, in other words, leisure, entertainment, etc., and about 25-30% to traditional retail. That's now being questioned, even by them, as to whether that's the right economic model. So it's not an easy choice, not an easy positioning.
Are you beginning to see in your centres, I suppose, more of a mix in terms of the types, you know, whether it's Matthias and the kind of clothing brands, or whether it's cinemas or F&B? Are you seeing more of a move towards that? And I suppose, what are the implications for the investor, as Chris pointed out?
What Chris just mentioned, so the shift also, what the American Mall, it's more like an amusement park almost, and less of I think that is the main question mark, how you can make money out of that, because the F&B and but leisure in particular can pay per square meter. I think everybody can confirm that they can pay less per square meter. So from a landlord point of perspective, that's difficult to invest too much in leisure and F&B and take fashion out. We are predominantly invested at Redevco in the inner cities in Europe, in high street locations, and there we see on the top floors, if you look at the ERVs, the rents that are paid on top floors by department stores, etc., are relatively low. So they are 6-8 euros. And if you then see that residential is paying maybe 15 euros per square meter, and sometimes office 20-25, as well as hotels, then you see that the delta that you then gain there is quite high. So I think Herman also wants to join in later on. Dropping very expensive fashion retail square meters on the ground floor, where fashion retailers can still make good turnovers, and then turning that into leisure that are paying less. I don't see that happening now, but maybe that will change at a certain moment when the turnovers that are made on the ground floor and first floors by fashion retailers are lower than other uses, then it will change into other uses. That's how I see it.
I agree very much with what Rowan is saying on particularly department stores and in the city locations. And obviously that's also with Meyer Bergman, we have built up some track records also in previous years. But obviously one of the key issues there, of course, is in the city, I mean, from a market point of view, obviously the opportunity to transform those floors really away from retail, make it workspaces, make it residential spaces, make it a hotel. Market-wise, location-wise, often that's feasible. Obviously, what we encounter also, obviously, if you want to change a building which was, let's say, mono-retail, and you want to shift it to a mixed use, It's obviously not, let's say, a given deal when you have to deal, for instance, with urban planning departments, with city authorities, etc., etc. Of course, they have a zoning plan, they have a functional idea how a building should be, and it's, you know, they still have to get used to the fact that, well, by time and time, the retail supply will decrease. That basically, particularly upper floors, back spaces, other elements in the building, they will probably never become retail anymore in the future anymore. And how, you know, to give those spaces a new future, accepting actually that the role of that building in the urban fabric is going to change. And that, of course, is with urban mixed use. And I think that idea is growing, the awareness is growing, but it's obviously a game in which it takes multiple actors to tango, but also of, you know, different people on different sides of the table understand that the world is changing, and in order to untap the value of that building in that new world, that requires, let's say, actions and decisions.
Okay, good. I'm just gonna do a quick poll on this as well, which is which sector do you think will perform best in the current market? This is all obviously within the retail side: food-led retail, community-led retail centres, urban mixed-use retail, urban shopping centres, out-of-town retail, and high street retail. So feel free to answer those and give us your views. Matthias, interesting to pick up on some of the points that they've just been there.
Yeah.
Because there was a mention there from Chris about a lot of retailers having to reduce their stores. But if, like you, for example, there may be an opportunity for Orsay to grow into different countries, different regions. So I suppose what's your strategy?
So the strategy for us is very clear. First, we define a reason why for Orsay. So we make fashion. We defined our target woman as an orientation as a one woman. We called her Julia. But who is Julia and if how many? This is clear. But we have a clear assortment. For that, we have also 90% or 95% of our customer and our turnover is based on what we called customer club base. So we have loyal customer cards and we have loyal customer data, etc. And this is in the meanwhile what we build up. So this is our assets. And at the end, it is the product and Julia, the customer, and how we connect both through service, to data, and to processes. And for us, we already started with a strong e-commerce approach, but again, it's only 20% of the business, but high contributionable. And this is what we see in the offline business. So we think, for me, since 2 years, I'm saying the offline business and the retail store is a part of a channel. It is a performance marketing channel. So if you talk about SEO, SEI, and you talk about affiliates in your e-com business, then you have also a store. So a store is performance marketing. But if this performance marketing is too expensive by rents or by personal costs, something is wrong. If you come back to this, then you see, of course, if we rent a store for 3 years, then we see how we can use this store to get a lot of customer out of this because of the traffic. And what we do with each customer, we have now in our service. And this is the business model of each retailer. And those retailers who are not customer-oriented, service-oriented, data-oriented, and keep the customer, be loyal with your customer, will even not survive in the future anymore. And then we come back to where is the best place to be. So if we see the high street have traffic and we have a store there, what is affordable and leads to a kind of performance marketing. So we have to make a new P&L. And the P&L is based on customer lifetime value. And this is the store opening, it's performance costs, and then after, and maybe you have to close the store after 2 years or 1 year, but how to keep the customer and not lose a customer. Maybe we create a showroom, or maybe we have ambassadors, or maybe we have another way of how we could connect with the customer. So this is our way how we find solutions to be more independent. On the other side, we want to be retailer. We want to give a showroom, we want to give a store, because we believe in retail business. So, and if we are part, and we have only 150 square meter stores, so if we're talking about a center manager and he have always a typical way of, we have anchor tenants, big, and we have smaller. Yes, when we are part of the smaller ones, but each of the retailers like us, we have to start to be loyal with the customer. And even the center have the reason why it is there, and do they could keep customers. How? So there is much more what I expect now from everybody who is investor. The business is much more complex, but the business is much more service oriented. Transparent, be transparent with your tenant as being an investor, and then try to get the same customer base, and then keep the customer and build a kind of customer lifetime value on a track. So this is what the new dimension of investment in real estate, in shopping malls will be. And we as a tenant have to be flexible, have to be very clear that is only, and therefore the reason is how we could come to a turnover rent. This is in the fair way that it is both success at the end.
Good. I just wanted to pick up with you, Christiane and Thorsten, just in terms of, because Matthias there mentioned, you know, that really that's got to be a collaboration in a way to drive this forward. What's your sense of that at the moment? Are you seeing collaboration? You mentioned that you were working with both the tenant side and the landlord side. Are you seeing successful collaboration? Because I think Matthias's point is really interesting, which is about really for everybody in the industry, keeping the customer has got to be the key thing.
What we see right now with our discussions is that landlords start picking up on this idea that they have to collaborate, and they are really, the bigger they are, the more willing they are to start the negotiation with the customer, with the tenant, because they're interdependent with one another. If you have an empty shopping center because you drove all tenants, big or small, into insolvency, then you don't have a product where you can get any returns from. So I think, well, it took a while, but they get used to it. At least that's my point. Maybe, Christiane, you want to emphasize on that?
Yeah, I can only agree. I think it's a bit of, yeah, I wouldn't say game is the wrong word, but it's really, yeah, I think both sides getting closer to each other. And when you advising on lease negotiations for the last 12 years, and when you compare lease negotiations in the retail sector to office or other commercial uses, this is really, I think it's always been a tough negotiation. So it's because I think it's, yeah, one reason for that is that it's, yeah, the market is changing and this development has started for quite some time. Then it's also, there is a huge amount of trust required. So because the tenant is sharing the turnover rent is really a big thing, which you don't have see in office or other types of use. So it's really, yeah, and then it's very like energy consuming, very high service charges as well, and it's a lot of pressure in the whole sector. So, and I think this is not really helpful, but it's really good because both parties understand it's no one's fault right now. So, and to get out of this together is really, and try to make that possible is really key. And we've discussed that before. The whole, we've started to see, really, well-known retailers under insolvency administrations, and we've also have now seen the first, also landlords dealing with the first consequences there, for example, so that reconstruction obligations at the end of the lease agreements in insolvency proceedings, now tenant has to comply with that. So under the administrator is, under the statutory law in Germany, obliged to open the shop until the last day of the lease agreement, and to make as much profit for the whole procedure. And so there's basically, this is also becoming aware to the landlords now, and I think it's going into the right direction. Of course, I mentioned before there will be some landlords who will go, and also some tenants who go to court and probably see,
I'll just share these results with everybody about which sector do you think will perform best in the current market. Food-led retail comes out top, followed then closely by urban mixed-use retail, then out-of-town retail, high street retail, out-of-town retail, urban shopping centres. That's quite interesting that people are seeing food-led retail. That picks up a little bit on one of the questions that's come in on the chat that I just want to pick up, which is also, we'd mentioned about fashion retail, but what about the luxury end of the market? How do we see that? Bond Street, Avenue Montaigne, Via Spiga. How are we seeing that? And also particularly picking up a point, which is, are those sorts of tenants reacting differently, retailers reacting differently, especially because of the current reduction in tourist spend, both in terms of in-store and also the airport? I don't know whether that's something you've had any feedback on, Chris, from your clients.
Yeah, there has been. I mean, generally speaking, it's if we focus on luxury, I mean, there's also premium, which we could put into that category as well. So aspirational brands, but also luxury. Yeah, without a doubt, the luxury brands or that sector is challenged today because they have focused very much on a tourist consumer and obviously predominantly a Chinese consumer. Now, what's interesting is that some of them have been looking at their local markets. So I think this is a feature, generally speaking. When I talk about local, it's the national as well as the local community around them. So whether it's, I'm not saying it's necessarily Bond Street or Avenue Montaigne or Rue Saint-Honoré or whatever, but they're having to look at their business model as well and basically saying, how can we balance out? It's almost like a seasonality conversation, to be honest. You know, the tourists come in at a certain time, and then the nationals come in at another time. But the general view overall is that they've also had their challenges pre-COVID. As some of you may know, they've had a race for signing big deals, expensive deals, and the consumer's not necessarily been there. But I guess to answer that specific question, there's a feeling that premium will probably come back faster. In other words, the consumer for premium will come back faster. Luxury is going to take, I've heard brands say, they don't expect to see anything equivalent to this year until about the end of 2021 because they don't believe the consumer will come back in the same way. However, that's then where the e-commerce opportunity comes up. That, as Matthias said, a couple of points which I really like about what Matthias said is the customer relationship, the consumer. Who is she? What does she need? What are their expectations? And the other point Matthias mentioned, which is really important for us today, is data as well. Knowing what do you know about your consumer? Generally speaking, it's been left behind. We haven't really focused on that. So luxury is challenged. Some of you may have heard of revenge buying. So there have been one or two amazing cases, primarily in China, of people getting out there and buying aggressively in luxury brands. That will continue, but those are small gains. They're little peaks.
Just in terms of some of these changes in terms of use, Rowan, I mean, how practical is that in the sort of shopping centres that you're running? Is it going to be a question for people of, do you think there'll be, I guess, a differentiation between those shopping centres which will, or those retail areas that will hold their value and do well because they're either well positioned for experience or they're community led, or there are different elements to them, and then those that simply don't fit with the modern? Because at the moment I think we're seeing ideas of values dropping across the board. But do you think that's true, or do you think there will be some that, you know, that good retail will still hold its value and bad retail is going to kind of be nowhere?
I think that's true always. So good retail, if you mean that there's a good mix in an area, well connected, where you have enough universities, the population is there, well connected to public transportation, there is a good vibe. You have some historic places that is now under pressure, yes, because you don't have tourism, but it will come back again. That is my thought going forward. But the trend that poor shopping malls that are not big enough, not well managed, that they will suffer now more and quicker. Yes, yeah. I think they have they see a lot of difficulties because the retailers that are now closing their stores, they will look at their footprint and close the stores in the poor performing malls and areas, and keep them on the dominant, well-positioned areas when the traffic comes back again.
I think indeed, we went through a cycle in which, of course, there was a lot of panic among investors to invest in any type of retail. So obviously, retail investment volumes have been under pressure for quite a while. But I just, heard some first findings of Real Capital Analytics, RCA, earlier this morning. And actually, the retail investment, if you look at the European levels, is given the current COVID context, actually not so bad. So what you see obviously happening is, of course, it has already been referred to. Food retail is increasingly popular. But I think also investors increasingly also look at, and of course, prime, there is always some interest for prime retail. But also, obviously, investors are also increasingly looking to, okay, there is a retail asset, but what is the redevelopment, repositioning potential of that given asset? And look actually to, value which can be made in the future. I think that trend starts to become clear. But I think, for the retail market to become, let's say, more interesting again, of course, what has already been mentioned with all the store reductions going on, something will happen inside of the rent levels, obviously, but also, and of course, also in, let's say, the polarization between prime and secondary assets. I expect that to continue for the time being.
And that's interesting because there's a lot of discussion at the moment in terms of the office sector, particularly in the US, of a movement from city centre down to suburban areas and building more office in suburban areas potentially because the demand is potentially changing. I find it difficult to believe all of that, I have to say myself. But what's your sense of some of that change of demand? Do you see any of that in terms of that secondary cities or some suburban areas may potentially do better now because of a change, or do you just see this change as being something that everybody will actually go back to cities, will go back to offices in exactly the same way as they did before? What's your sense of that?
In the short term, you see that the customers just want to buy more local because they might avoid big crowds in the big cities. And if I just look out in Düsseldorf in the weekends, it's totally crazy because it looks a bit like normal, but you see a lot of locals from Düsseldorf and close by. But I think in the long run, it will just back to the time as it was before, from my perspective. So I think it's a short-term trend to go local, to go where you live, especially if you live out of town. But in the long run, I think you will just see the big shopping events in the big cities or big shopping centers more again.
Well, I mean, there are, of course, a lot of variables at play here. If you look at the history, we have seen the Spanish flu, we have seen a lot of pandemics in the past, other illnesses. We have always seen cities recovering from that, basically on the basis of adjustment, adaptation of, let's say, regulations on hygiene, on health, also adaptations, let's say, in the real estate, etc. So, of course, curious to see what we are going to adapt to change also on the basis of our COVID experience in the future. I think what we're also going to see, of course, is games like Brexit, a possible decoupling, deglobalization trends, geopolitical trends, and obviously looking in that respect on different maps. It is a possibility in that sense that, let's say, smaller capital cities, regional centers, etc., become, let's say, relatively more important. But that has also not only to deal with, let's say, the Corona COVID trend, but also the general, I would say, geopolitical trends, what we see happening around us.
Often disruption brings about innovation. Is the sort of flip side of all of this that actually you may get a whole load of new brands that come in, new, exciting, interesting brands, new, innovative, different spaces that people use for retail, that it's not as straightforward as just that there's going to be a pause in shopping or there's going to be more e-commerce? I mean, do we see that there could be potentially a number of brands may disappear, but maybe they'll be replaced by new and innovative brands?
I'd love to see it, first of all, to be honest, Richard. I think
I strongly believe as well.
For independents to come into the market, pop-ups in a different form, maybe a more structured, coordinated form. But let's not forget, I think it's important for us all to remember that retail has provided some of the geniuses of the industry, whether it's in shopping center development, creation, new concepts, new ideas, and also retailers and brands as well, some who I've worked for in the past. So retail is an extremely resilient sector. It has incredibly bright minds, and if anything is going to work, it can work through retail. The challenge, however, the flip side for me is having independence and a better mixed tenancy that one of the questions had earlier on. Is still going to come down to sitting around the table with the investors and owners and having a meeting of the minds, because as we all know, independence or small stores or new concepts cannot sustain the same rental levels as the big brands and chains can do. So there's got to be somehow a way of just coming back to that comment made by PwC about collaboration. We're going to have to find a way to sit around the table and find out what the future looks like. And then for me, the parting word on that would be leadership. We need leadership within our industry. And I'm not talking about government. I mean, coming from inside, finding strong visionary leaders who can say, this is the way we should go forward. Because quite frankly, right now, we don't have that, with the exception of one or two who I respect highly in this industry.
Okay, good. Just as a final question to everybody, to kind of bring this down to where we see opportunities, I suppose. I will just share a poll that I did as well, which was on, I suppose, investor intentions. What are investors likely to do in terms of retail? Invest more capital in retail was 0%. Invest the same capital but be more selective was 19%. And reallocate capital to other sectors was 81%. So that's a fairly clear view of what people see. But I'm sure there will be equally a number of people who I also know in the opportunistic world who would say, well, that is a perfect time to invest. So on that basis, let's look at what the opportunities are. Matthias, you can view this as a where would you ideally like to put your store?
Yeah.
But what does it mean, I suppose, in terms of locations? Where would we like to be investing either our money or our brand? Where would we like to invest at the moment? Would that be in Paris? Would it be in London? Would it be in Amsterdam? Would it be in so your choice of where you might invest at the moment? What strategy is going to work?
First, very clear. So now waiting, acting, cool down your store portfolio, make everybody clear, cool down the investors, and this is a base. And this is a time, I would say, till end of next year, so till 2021. This is a period where we see how the market, from the fashion point of view and some other retailers, sectors as well, will be cleared. And before all the years I was on stage all the way saying, okay, guys, we have too much retail space. We have too much fashion merchandise in the market. And out of this, it will come to less space. It will come to less fashion market. We will use artificial intelligence to make, coming from a push model. So we all buy something and we have to sell. And at the end, it's the other way around. So we have to bring the pull model in. But this is all the whole supply chain. So coming back to business model. So therefore, it's not only a single view that if you look on retail sector, what is the retail sector for us is only a thing how to do and how we have the connection. I see after the cool down of the market that they will survive and could start in 2022 to take much bigger piece of the cake, with much more flexibility. And I see for us, you said Paris, London, whatever, okay. If the rent is good, we go. But if we also go on the land side, we see a lot of opportunities. I see a lot of opportunities, but with a cool down of a rent. And then we come to the P&L, and then will you stay there for 5 years, 6 years? We will see. And on the other side, I mentioned that we are, with 700 stores, we are a system retailer, trying to be individual with Julia. But I'm happy if we could come back to individual retailers, because they could afford now to rent a store to bring more the real retail consumer feeling back to customers. And this is where we're talking about new brands, new ideas, startup thinking, but with a better base on rent and this case. And maybe in 2 years, it's much more healthier than it was today. And the overheating is over. And I hope this will be the way. And we will be there for sure. I'm confident that we will be part of the piece of cake then taking. So let's cross the finger. Thank you for everything.
Anything you want to pick up, Christiane?
Yeah, as a big trend, I think ESG has now really also arrived in the retail sector. And so in the last couple of weeks, they were quite busy, and it was partly extinguishing fires and dealing with emergency, providing for liquidity and getting this all in place. And the other thing we really focused on at PwC, I think I might also mention that in the last sessions we had, is really focusing on ESG. So all stakeholders, and also also when you look at the client base of the retailers, is really considering ESG criteria right now. ESG strategies are being developed and implemented. So I think it's a must now. Yeah, it's mandatory.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, that ESG trend has certainly been one of the things that has been highlighted, especially by the current crisis, I think. Rowan, opportunities.
Yeah, for us, that's investing in our assets throughout Germany to diversify, getting new tenants in. I think it was mentioned a few times already, getting different tenants in. But sometimes it's also maybe a boring tenant. So you see now supermarkets getting back into the inner cities because rents are dropping. And so it becomes finally easier for supermarkets, smaller concepts, nice gastro, also drugstores to getting back into great locations that before that they were not able to do so. But also on the top floor for residential to turn that around into residential that's now also achievable with dropping rents.
I would see, I think the biggest opportunity and the biggest urgency at the same time is to find a good, solid foundation for landlord-tenant relationships. I don't think that we can go very far without that. But if we go, otherwise we're going around in circles. I wanted to touch on just very briefly the outlet model. We haven't really had time to talk about it here, but one of the things that the outlet model does is that it creates a collaborative environment. So the owner actually has a vested interest in making sure that the brands in the outlet succeed. And the brands in the outlet very much need the platform of the outlet itself to succeed. I'm not saying that anything is necessarily all perfect, but I think that's a starting point. Matthias talked about turnover rents and so on. Many people disagree with that. The investors don't know how to use it. The valuers don't know how to implement it. So it's maybe not a perfect model, but it's a starting point where you start to look at how that relationship can be fixed because it's broken.
Great. Herman.
Last word, not an easy one, because a lot of things have been said, which I agree with, and a lot of good ideas. Obviously, looking for opportunities in the future, I agree with also what has been said before, give it a little bit patience. Market is disturbed, market will have to adjust, expectations on rents and values will also be corrected probably in the coming times. So for us, obviously, nice urban positions. We like retail. We like also a lot of retail real estate, and particularly there where you can create a new future, where you can reposition retail, where you can make new formats, where you can make change, but also where you basically can reduce the amount of retail in the building and, for instance, integrate with other functions to make the whole building, let's say, valuable and livable.
Thanks very much to everybody for sharing your insights, your views. Thank you also for your comments and for your questions. Upcoming events for us are on the 9th of July. So tomorrow we've got Outlook France, which is at 9:30 UK, and the Future of Office, which is at 2:30 UK time. And then the 15th of July, we've got student housing. And then there'll be a break from the events for the summer whilst we're working on RealX. And we'll try and run a whole series of events focused around retail in September at RealX and beyond, just to pick up on a number of these issues, because I think they're going to be changing a great deal. So thank you to everybody for joining us. Thank you to all of the speakers. Really great to share insights with you. And to everybody, thank you. See you at the next one. And in the meantime, keep safe, keep well, and keep shopping. Thanks very much.